Post-traumatic stress disorder, otherwise known as PTSD, is a psychological disorder that may occur in individuals that have witnessed or experienced a traumatic incident. The traumatic incident may be anything from a natural disaster, a serious accident, a terrorist attack, war or combat, rape, or those who are threatened with death, sexual assault, or serious injury. What one person may be considered to be traumatic, another may not. Exposure to an unsettling, stressful experience is needed for a PTSD diagnosis. The exposure, however, may be indirect rather than firsthand. PTSD, for instance, could even occur in a person knowing about a nearby family or friend's violent death. It can even be a result of prolonged exposure to horrific trauma information, such as police officers subjected to details of incidents of child violence. The symptoms of PTSD fall into 4 categories: intrusion, avoidance, alterations in cognition and mood, and alterations in arousal and activity. These symptoms can vary in severity and be significantly different within each individual. As far as statistics go, about 7 or 8 out of every 100 people, or 7 to 8% of the population, will have PTSD at some point in their lives. About 8 million adults have PTSD during a given year, though this is only a small portion of those who have gone through a trauma. About 10 out of every 100 women, or 10%, develop PTSD sometime in their lives, compared to only about 4 out of every 100 men, or 4%. Child Protection Services in the U.S. get around 3 million reports each year. This involves 5.5 million children. Of the reported cases, there is proof of abuse in about 30%. From these cases, we have an idea of how often different types of abuse occur. 65% is neglect, 18% is physical abuse, 10% is sexual abuse, and 7% is psychological abuse.
In terms of nature, PTSD is moderately heritable, but both trauma researchers and psychiatric geneticists have generally ignored the role of genetic influences in PTSD etiology, although numerous genetic risk factors that relate to the seriousness of the condition have been revealed in PTSD research. For example, a previous study of more than 165,000 U.S. military veterans, led by Yale's Joel Gelenter, a professor of psychiatry and professor of genetics and neuroscience at the Foundation's Fund, found variations in 8 distinct genome regions that help determine who is most likely to encounter the recurring upsetting experiences and hallucinations that are all hallmark PTSD syndromes. In terms of nurture, 3 factors have been shown to raise the chances that children will get PTSD. These factors are how severe the trauma is, how the parents react to the trauma, and how close or far away the child is from the trauma. Neglect is a pattern of failing to provide for a child's basic needs, which include adequate food, clothing, hygiene, or supervision. 3 elements that intertwine with physical abuse are unpredictability, lashing out in anger, and using fear to control behavior. Sexually abused children are often tormented by shame and guilt. The shame of sexual abuse makes it very difficult for children to come forward. Psychological abuse consists of constant belittling, shaming, humiliating, yelling, threatening, bullying, and exposing a child to violence against others. These 4 are examples of the different types of abuse that led to PTSD.
Partially, natural biological activity is dictated by the environment. The immune system and the stress response systems of the body may not evolve naturally if a child grows up afraid or under persistent or intense stress. Even under normal stressors, these systems will immediately behave as though the person is under severe stress. For example, a person may experience severe physiological reactivity, such as fast breathing or heart beating. When faced with stressful conditions, they may shut down completely. The brain and nervous system development can be affected by stress in an environment. In neglectful conditions, the absence of mental stimuli can restrict the brain from developing to its full potential. Complexly traumatized teens also suffer from body dysregulation, meaning they over-respond to sensory stimuli or under-respond to them. They might be hypertensive to noises, textures, contact, or illumination, for instance, or they may suffer anesthesia or analgesia, under which discomfort, touch, or internal physical stimuli are not established. As a consequence, without experiencing discomfort, they can hurt themselves, suffer from health conditions without being conscious of them, or conversely, they can complain of chronic pain in different parts of the body for which no apparent cause can be identified.
Children with a complicated history of abuse can have trouble thinking logically, reasoning, or solving problems. They will not be able to think ahead, predict the future, and behave accordingly. All their internal capital goes into survival as kids grow up under conditions of relentless danger. When their bodies and minds have evolved to be in the mode of persistent stress response, they may have difficulties peacefully thinking about a dilemma and weighing many alternatives. It could be difficult for them to learn new knowledge or take new details into account. They may fail to control focus or curiosity or be overwhelmed by responses to memories of trauma. In language development and abstract reasoning abilities, they can display deficits. In the school world, often children who have undergone complex trauma have learning challenges that could need assistance.
Children who have undergone complex trauma often have difficulties recognizing, communicating, and controlling feelings and may have restricted state feeling vocabulary. They also internalize responses or externalize them and can suffer severe depression, anxiety, or frustration as a result. It is likely that their emotional responses are erratic or explosive. A child can react with shaking, rage, sorrow, or avoidance to a reminder of a traumatic event. Emotion control problems are pervasive and often arise in the absence of partnerships. Many of these children become quickly overwhelmed after they have never known how to quiet themselves down while they are agitated. They may, for instance, become so overwhelmed in school that they give up on even a minor task that is presented as a challenge. Children who have endured early and severe stressful experiences are often more likely to be scared all the time, and under certain cases, they are much more likely to develop depression.
A child with a complicated history of trauma can be quickly stimulated or set off and is more likely to respond very strongly. The child will suffer with self-regulation, like learning how to calm down, and may lack the control of urges or the ability to think before acting about consequences. As a consequence, children who are complexly traumatized will act in ways that seem erratic, oppositional, chaotic, and serious. In reaction to perceived responsibility or assault, a child who feels helpless or who grew up fearing an oppressive authority figure may respond defensively and violently, or alternately may be over-controlled, strict, and unusually cooperative with adults at times. This can also influence actions if a child dissociates frequently. A child may appear spacey, disconnected, remote, or out of contact with reality. Children with complex abuse are more likely to engage in high-risk activities such as self-harm, risky sexual habits, and reckless risk-taking, such as driving a high-speed car.
There are many different treatment and educational programs that someone with PTSD can go to help them, the first being cognitive processing therapy. It reflects on changing the trauma of painful emotional feelings such as embarrassment, remorse, and attitudes such as, I have failed, or the world is dangerous. Therapists support the client to face those distressing feelings and memories. The second is prolonged exposure therapy. Repeated thorough imagination of the trauma or incremental response to symptom stimuli is used in a healthy, controlled fashion to help a person face and maintain control and learn to deal with anxiety and depression. Virtual reality services, for example, have been used to support war veterans with PTSD in a controlled, therapeutic way to re-experience the battlefield. The third one is stress inoculation therapy. This attempts to arm the person with the requisite coping skills to efficiently protect against traumatic stimuli by exposing milder amounts of stress, just as a vaccine would inoculate after exposure to a disease to avoid infection. The fourth being group therapy. This encourages survivors of related stressful situations in a relaxed and non-judgmental atmosphere to share their thoughts and responses. Community participants help each other understand that several individuals will have reacted in the same way and felt the same feelings. Family therapy may also help because the individual with PTSD's behavior and distress can affect the entire family. The fifth would be medication. The effects of PTSD may be managed with medicine. In comparison, the symptom relief that medicine offers helps certain patients to engage in psychotherapy more efficiently. Some antidepressants are widely used to manage central effects of PTSD, such as SSRIs and SNRIs, which is selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors and serotonin non-epinephrine reuptake inhibitors. They are used either individually or with psychotherapy or other therapies in conjunction.
The first component for treatment of a child is psychoeducation. Both the adult and the child need to understand what natural reactions to trauma are. It may be a very unnerving occurrence for people with a history of abuse that could fit the requirements for post-traumatic stress disorder. The second component is skill bonding. It significantly helps if the child has a skill to deal with extreme anxiety. The last component is trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. It is significant to evaluate the experiences that occur to individuals because it allows closure. It is also important to self-evaluate why the traumatic experiences have happened so it is understood there is nothing one could have done to prevent the trauma and that it is not their fault. Treatments for adolescents are the same treatment as for adults.
In a varied population of trauma-exposed hospitalized teens, the study explored correlations between emotional clarification. It was believed that exposure to fear would be associated with signs of mental clarity and PTSD. Findings found that poorer cognitive clarity as well as re-experiencing avoidance and arousal effects are strongly correlated with higher overall PTSD symptoms. The findings of this study indicate that difficulties in recognizing and correctly understanding emotions may increase the risk of symptoms of PTSD among young people subjected to trauma. In addition, anxiety vulnerability, particularly among those displaying poor emotional clarity, could be a promising intervention goal among young people at risk for PTSD.